For the first, 38 years of my life, I really didn't pay any attention whatsoever to gardening. That was not one of my pastimes. My dad has always been a big gardener, but I never got bitten by that bug as a kid. And as a young adult, I lived in New York, and then I had kids, and gardening just seemed like something that people with more time than I had did. And then when I started dating my now husband, Riley, he's a very avid gardener, has been since he was a kid, and his mom's really into gardening. And so, as you do, you're spending time with somebody, and I would go walk around his yard with him, and he'd show me this plant and that plant. And I still didn't feel like it was my thing. It was his thing, but I was paying more attention. And then when COVID hit, and at that point, he had moved in, and we were spending all this time at my house with my backyard, which was like a barren wasteland. And we had all this extra time on our hands. We ended up kind of taking on the project of gardening the backyard, not necessarily like trying to grow specifically garden plants, but like really trying to put together a backyard that felt like something other than the surface of the moon. It was a big project. My kids got involved, and much to my surprise, I really enjoyed it. I still consider myself someone who doesn't have enough time to really do the gardening thing to its fullest extent. And by no means am I like a gardening expert, but I have found that I'm better at it than I ever gave myself credit for. I used to joke around that I had a black thumb. Turns out I have some intuition about plants and, if something is suffering, why it might be suffering, and what we can do to help it. And I've learned a lot. I feel like a lot of people who are really into gardening will tell you that they learn a lot from their garden and sort of the patience and everything else that's required. So why am I telling you this? I was thinking about this the other day. I am not the first person, nor will I be the last, to use the rather obvious metaphor of gardening to illustrate all kinds of points in life. But I wanted to use it today to talk about it as it relates to how we build a business. And I think that I've touched on it before here on the podcast and in some of my emails and things like that. But there are so many ways that it relates. And I figured it was enough to put together in a podcast episode. And for those of you who are gardeners, I hope you particularly enjoy this one and can really kind of relate to some of these points that I'm going to make. And for those of you who aren't, stick around. I actually don't think that any of this is going to be confusing. And maybe it'll give you the bug to walk around whatever land you have available to you and think about how it relates to what you're trying to build in your business.
Welcome to This Can't Be That Hard. My name is Anami Tonkin, and I help photographers run profitable, sustainable businesses that they love. Each week on the podcast, I cover simple, actionable strategies and systems that photographers at every level of experience can use to earn more money in a more sustainable way. Running a photography business doesn't have to be that hard. You can do it, and I can show you how.
All right. So when we went into the backyard, looked at what was there, which was some trees. I do have trees in my backyard. And then there were some kind of scraggly bushes, and there wasn't a whole lot else. We looked at this, and the question was, okay, what do we have to work with? What do we envision in the future that this could look like? And honestly, that was the part for me that was probably the hardest. I looked at this backyard, and I've always thought that I had a reasonable eye for interior design, but like landscape design was not something that I had any sense of whatsoever. So I'm looking around and I'm like, well, I guess we could just put a bush against the corner over there and one over there in the other corner. It was, it's like giving a 3-year-old a set of Legos to play with. And Riley gently but encouragingly guided me through this process of, well, what if we were trying to create some sort of path over here? And what if this area over here that was in more sun, what if we tried to grow some flowers over here? And so, we went through this exercise, but it very quickly became apparent that thing number one that we needed to do was bring in a whole bunch of topsoil, because the backyard just had like zero soil quality. It was this kind of fine dust that we used to joke around and call moon dust, and nothing was really going to grow in this very infertile soil. So step one was kind of cleaning up what was there, getting rid of like some of the big weeds and that sort of thing. And then we were kind of starting from scratch. And this is where this business metaphor kind of started to take root. See what I did there? In my mind, where I was thinking like, it's essentially a clean slate. Like when you start a business, maybe you have a couple of things, like a couple of trees that you're building around. And in my case, when I started my business, the trees were the fact that I was a labor and delivery nurse. I had a lot of people in my world who had newborn babies and young families. I worked with a whole bunch of nurses and doctors who were in that stage of life. And so were interested in photography. So those were kind of the things that came with my plot of land, if you want to call it that. But other than that, I had moon dust, right? And nothing that was going to grow of its own volition. So the very first thing that I needed to do was kind of tend to the soil and address the fact that I was going to be trying to grow something soon. So you think about, this is where you're educating yourself. You're kind of getting your ducks in a row. You're setting yourself up with the knowledge and the equipment and everything else that you need to start a business. And then the very first lesson that I feel like you learn when you start to work at a yard or a garden is really patience. So you can go to the garden center and pick out all the seeds and the little baby plants and all this stuff. And it's very exciting because in your mind, you're imagining what will be. And then you put these things in the ground and you hover, right? You're standing over them, sort of twiddling your thumbs, looking, peering, hoping. Every morning you go out, is there a little green shoot here? Is that a weed, or is that something coming up from the seed that I planted? Or these little baby plants that you put in. I made the mistake frequently of planting them too close together because, they're so tiny. And I have had to transplant a whole bunch of things as they get bigger and cannot be in the same space, right? But in the beginning, it really is, you get all this excitement and then it feels like crickets for an interminable period of time. There is that busyness at the beginning of a business that gets us very excited, and it gets our people in our circles excited too, right? You're talking about, oh, I'm starting my business, da, 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 da. And then the doors to the business open. And if you're like most of us, not a whole lot happens for a while. And it can be hard. And your friends are saying, how's the business going? And you're like, I don't know. Nothing's happening. I'm just sitting here waiting for my phone to ring. And it can feel kind of demoralizing. But if you know to expect that that's not going to immediately just like burst into flower, then that patience will serve you, because that's what a garden requires. A garden also requires consistent attention, right? So we scatter these seeds, we plant these little plants, and then over time we're paying attention. Is this too dry over here? Is it too sunny over here? Is it not sunny enough over here? Do I need to move something? Do I need to mulch something? Do I need to water something? That attention over time, not over attention, but consistently making the rounds, right? You're not just looking at one plant in one corner of the yard. You're walking all the way around, checking on all of your plants all the time. It's also a bit of a lab experiment. We are constantly having to try something to see what works. Now, some people seem to be just naturally better at this. They have more intuition about, what plant's going to work in what spot, or certainly the internet can tell us like, this is a good idea. But if you've ever tried to grow anything in a yard, you know that there are times when you feel like you've got everything done just right, set up exactly the way that they tell you to do it, and the plant fails for some reason or another. We have to take all of this with something of a grain of salt, right? You can't get too precious or too attached to any one piece of your business or idea that you have in your business or the way that you're going to do something in a particular situation. You want to try it and see how it goes. And if the plant fails, if the idea doesn't take, or you've set up your offer in a particular way and nobody's really biting, it doesn't mean that that plant can't grow there, or that you have to just scrap it all and start all over. But you do want to start to put on your science hat and think, like, what could I change? What small incremental changes could I make that might make the difference for this particular situation? The next question is really one of vision and, what kind of plants are you interested in planting in your yard? You can have a yard that looks a whole bunch of different ways, right? You can have like a tropical looking yard. You can have a French garden. You can have an English garden. You can have a Japanese garden. There's different styles of gardens that different people prefer. None of them are better or worse. However, they are different in that some of them are higher maintenance and some of them are lower maintenance, right? You've got your French gardens where everything is super manicured, and you've got topiary and things are in very neat rows and it's very organized feeling. And then you've got sort of the English garden model where it's much more like, we're just going to bring in a bunch of native plants. We're going to kind of clump them together. It's not that there's no method to the madness. There definitely is. And there are these spectacularly beautiful English gardens, but they feel more organic. They don't require quite as much fastidious maintenance as their French garden counterparts. And Japanese gardens take that sort of planfulness and take it to the next level. And you've got sort of the negative space and all this. So if we're relating this to a business, and I apologize if my metaphor isn't clear enough here, but as you are beginning to envision what this garden is that you're planting and what it's going to look like, you need to check in not just with what you like aesthetically, but you also have to check in with like what you're willing to do to maintain what you're growing. Now, if you've heard me talk about the like donkey model versus the workhorse model versus the unicorn model, the unicorn model is going to be that like French garden. It requires constant maintenance, attention. It has to be just so. You have to keep it like pruned within an inch of its life at all times, because you are attracting this very specific kind of clientele with a very specific kind of experience. If you want to do something that is a more low maintenance, you're going to need to build a business that doesn't require you and your attention and action at every step of the way. You have to be able to automate some things. So that would be more like a workhorse model or a donkey model. The next kind of question is whether you are going to fight nature or kind of lean into nature. So I live in North Carolina. We are zone, 8, sometimes 9 in the periphery. And if I want to grow orchids, I have to understand that those don't stay outside for very long in my area. So beyond sort of the general style of the garden or the general business model that you're employing, you want to be thinking about your plants, right? And your plants are kind of like your clients. So are you looking for a garden full of local native plants that are easy to grow because they want to grow in your area? And then once you've sort of put together like a vision for your overall garden, your overall business, right? Your business model, then you want to consider who it is that you are trying to attract to your business. So if you've ever heard me talk about bluebirds before, these are your ideal clients. Who are your ideal clients? If this is a garden and we're using that, are you looking for kind of these exotic plants that maybe, you have to import and they're harder to find and they're fancy and people, come over and kind of ooh and ah over them? Or are you somebody who's happy to plant the local varieties, like the native plants to your area that are happy to grow in your soil conditions and your weather patterns, all that sort of thing? Again, those plants are available to you. Those people are available to you basically wherever you live. But if you live in the desert and you decide that what you really want to grow are these lush green plants, it's going to cost you a ton of water and a ton of time, because you are going to have to create a set of circumstances that don't come easily. And I see this happen a lot with businesses where, somebody will come to me and say, there's just no one in my town who can spend what I charge for photography. And when we dig deeper, sometimes that's, like a thinking trap. They're assuming, making assumptions, or they're kind of like blocking out the fact that there are people in their area that are able to afford that. However, sometimes you are truly trying to plant, an orange tree in the middle of the desert. You're fighting against what's happening. And rather than saying, okay, I'm going to have a cactus garden here, you're setting yourself up for a more uphill battle. Same thing with kind of reading the room. Is there shade in your garden, or is there sun in your garden? And therefore, like, what plants are going to be able to thrive in that space? You have to evaluate who your audience is and somehow figure out how you can put the plants that you like, that require the maintenance that you can give, in the space that you have. But the last thing that I want to mention here, I know this is a short episode. Hopefully I haven't gone way too far down the garden path with my silly metaphor here. But the last thing that I want to talk about is probably the piece that I find the most important. So if you have never been to a garden shop before, if you are not a gardener at all, you may not be aware that there are two different areas when you go into the plant store for outdoor plants. You've got your annuals section, and then you have your perennials section. Annuals are the plants that will not survive the winter, typically, in your area. So you can plant them and you'll enjoy them for the season, and then they're going to die, and their roots will die over the winter because typically it gets too cold. So oftentimes, at least where I live, the annuals are quite beautiful. There's tons of color. They're really interesting, and they are also typically cheaper. They're, $1 or $2 for a little plant, and you pick up a whole big flat of them and you take them home and you put them in, and it makes kind of an immediate impact, and they're really, fun to have. But if you do nothing but buy annuals and plant annuals, then every single year in the spring, you're going to walk out into a completely dead yard, and you're going to have to start from scratch. And that is the piece that I feel like no matter what kind of garden you envision, no matter what kind of plants you like, no matter if you've got shade or sun in your yard, I think that the goal for every photographer should be to start to incorporate perennials into their gardening scheme year after year, and grow the perennials so that every year they walk out in the spring and have plants growing up out of the ground, blooming on their own. If you need to take a year off of active gardening, things are still going to be out there because you took the time, spent the money to put in some perennials that you can really enjoy. Now, when I talk about annuals versus perennials in the photography space, I am talking about clients who come to you once versus clients that come again and again and refer their friends and you're just sort of like the bedrock of your garden. You've heard me talk about this before. This is my favorite time of year to talk about it, but especially this year, as I have listened to photographers just talk about how they are struggling with inquiries, I feel more and more strongly about how smart it is for photographers to create some kind of membership offering in their business. A membership gives you the opportunity to invite your best clients back on a regular basis. And I have always said, my family clients come back, my family member clients come back year after year. So that is truly a perennial kind of a thing. But I now have students who have brand memberships where people are coming back monthly or quarterly. I've got some family and pet photography students who have created something that's more like every 2 years because they don't have the demand for yearly photos. But what they still get, what all of those photographers get, is income that is perennial. It comes in month after month after month, and their clients are coming back year after year or quarter after quarter in a way that they can plan the rest of their business around. So you can still have annuals. I think that having those clients that are new is always important, and will keep your perennial beds sort of balanced, because if everybody is on the membership, eventually as they leave, you're losing clients. You always want to have those new clients coming in. So I'm not saying don't be out marketing for new clients, but if you can find clients who are like, I've found you, you're exactly the photographer for me, I don't want to have to go shop around, put that into a process that is easy, that you have some control over, where you are offering to take the burden of having to like remember that it's time to schedule. And by splitting up their payments into monthly payments, you're taking away the heavy lift that is like, oh man, we have to go drop a couple $1,000s again. When I started a membership in my own business, I was just amazed at how much peace of mind it gave me almost instantly, right? And that peace of mind is invaluable in an industry that is just fraught with ups and downs, right? If we have nothing but annuals, we'll call them like cute little pansies that we're planting in our yard, and then you get a late freeze, if that's like the economy slows down or anything else, they're going to die. And then you don't have any plants. But if you've got these perennials, they may suffer during that, late freeze, but chances are, and certainly the more established they become, they are going to survive, and you are going to survive because you've got them there. So at the end of this episode, I want you to sit down. If you do not already have a membership in your business, I want you to sit down and I want you to think of 3 clients who have hired you multiple times. And I want you to put yourself in their shoes and think, what is it about working with me that they like? What is it about working with me that they might not like, that I might be able to change a little bit? How can I create an offer for them that brings them back again and again, and that could sort of lean into the things that they like and maybe lift some of the things that they don't like, and toy with that idea, because this is a great time of year to implement a membership. I have a course that answers all the different questions, right? Like, what do you include in your membership offer? How much do you charge? Who do you invite? How do you invite them? How do you manage your membership? Like, there are a lot of pieces to a membership. But even if my course isn't of interest to you, even if you're, not in that mind frame to launch a whole thing, I want you to think about how you might bring 1 or 2 people into that repeating membership model now, and just lay the foundation. Plant a couple of those perennial plants, because as you save up and add more perennial plants and, start to see how that grows and how that feeds your garden and fills your garden year after year, it becomes easier and easier, and the results start to compound. So if you're like, I'm sold, I want to start a membership, I do have a course that will walk you through every single step of creating a membership. That course is called Revenue on Repeat, and you can find out about it on my website. Just go to thiscan'tbethathard.com and go to the Learn tab, I believe. You'll see it underneath there. But if you're like, I'm not sure if that's going to work for me, I don't know if that's going to be worth the sort of time and effort involved in getting it set up, I do have a quiz that is intended to give you a general sense of how much money you could make in the first year if you were to start a membership. It's a 3-question quiz, and I'm not asking you anything personal. So So it is not going to give you like a dollar value, but it will give you an amount relative to your overall income. Like I said, it's 3 questions. It's not difficult to take. So you can go to thiscan'tbethathard.com/membership quiz to answer those questions. You don't even have to answer, or you don't even have to enter your email address if you're not interested. It's just to get your wheels turning, because I really do believe that this is something that basically every photographer should have set up. So that's it. I hope that this little walk in the garden has been a pleasant exercise for you, no matter what seeds it planted. And for those of you who are interested in starting a membership, definitely be in touch. Ask me all the questions. I am a huge champion of memberships in photography businesses. And if you want my support, I am here to give it.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of This Can't Be That Hard. I'll be back same time, same place next week. In the meantime, you can find more information about this episode, along with all the relevant links, notes, and downloads at thiscan'tbethathard.com/learn. If you like the podcast, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Even better, share the love by leaving a review in iTunes. And as always, thanks so much for joining me. I hope you have a fantastic week.